Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is State of the U.S. Energy Storage Industry 2018 Year in Review. This webinar is being presented by the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, also known as STAP. STAP is a project of the U.S. Department of Energy, Sandia National Laboratories, and the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA. Our host for this webinar is Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is a project director here at CESA. We also have a number of excellent speakers on the line. But before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. You can call in using a telephone, or you can connect using a computer, mic, and speakers. If you'd like to minimize your webinar console, you can use the little orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also use that arrow to expand the webinar console. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions and your comments throughout the webinar by typing them into the questions box on your webinar console and hitting send. We have a lot of people registered for this webinar today, so we expect to get a lot of questions. To make sure that we get to your question, type it in when you think of it. Don't wait until the very end of the webinar to submit your question. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email with a copy of the webinar recording that will probably go out this afternoon. And we'll also be posting the webinar recording on CESA's website at cesa.org/webinars. You can also go to that URL for information about other exciting webinars that we have coming up and for other previous webinar recordings. So with that, I would like to pass it over to our host for today's webinar, Todd Olinsky-Paul. As I said, Todd is a project director here at the Clean Energy States Alliance.
Thank you, Samantha. Welcome to the webinar, everybody. This is, I believe, I don't know, the fourth, perhaps, year that we've done this annual look back at the state of energy storage in the U.S. And it's proved to be extremely popular. In fact, it is at this point the most popular webinar registrations that we've done. So we expect a lot of folks to join us today, and for that reason, we have extended this to an hour and a half so that we have more time to answer questions. Please type those in as they occur to you, and at the end of the presentations, I will be relaying questions to our presenters. A little bit of background, Clean Energy States Alliance is a nonprofit located in Vermont. Essentially, it's a membership organization of state clean energy funds, and you can see many of the members' logos on this slide before you. Next slide, please, Samantha. Basically, Clean Energy States Alliance works with our member states to help them in managing and administering their clean energy programs of all sorts. And we do research for them. We enable them to share knowledge between themselves from state to state, and also vertically from the national labs and DOE and down to the municipalities. And we do other things as well. So one of our projects is the STAP project, the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership. And this is a long-standing project that we do under contract with Sandia National Laboratories and funded by U.S. DOE Office of Electricity. The key activities of the project are all revolving around encouraging and supporting the deployment of energy storage on the larger scale, primarily. So that's primarily utility scale and large industrial commercial scale storage. We disseminate information to stakeholders through webinars such as this one and other means. We facilitate partnerships between DOE, the National Lab, and states and sometimes municipalities to jointly deploy energy storage projects and enable those projects to benefit from the expertise of the labs through technical assistance, and sometimes from additional support from DOE in the form of matching funds. And we support state efforts to develop energy storage policy and regulations. So that would be in terms of establishing and designing energy storage programs such as grants, rebates, energy efficiency with storage, procurement mandates, and so forth, and lending technical support to those efforts. Next slide, please. So I would like to briefly introduce our speakers for today, and then we will hand it over to them for the content of the webinar. We're going to have an introduction from Dr. Imre Gyuk, Director of Energy Storage Research at U.S. DOE Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability. Dr. Gyuk has served as the Director of DOE OE Electrical Energy Storage Research Program for the past decade. And that program supports development of a wide portfolio of storage technologies for a broad spectrum of applications. Dr. Gyuk is an internationally recognized expert on energy storage technology. We're going to also hear from Dan Finn-Foley, a senior analyst with the energy storage team at Wood Mackenzie Power and Renewables, which you may formerly have known as GTM Research. Dan focuses on front-of-the-meter energy storage applications. He previously worked as a senior consultant with DNV-GL, where he focused on competitive energy markets and emerging energy business strategies. He's also worked in the past with Navigant Consulting and also with Department of Energy. We also have Dan Borneo on board for the webinar, although Dan may not, probably will not present. He may jump in with a comment here and there, and he's certainly going to be contributing to fielding your questions. Dan is the engineering program and project lead and principal member of technical staff at Sandia National Laboratories. He serves as the principal investigator and project team leader for the Department of Energy, Office of Electricity, Energy Storage Systems Projects Program, and he has 35 plus years of experience in the electrical power industry. So with that, I will pass the baton to Dr. Gyuk for his introductory remarks, and I just want to again remind everybody to please submit questions as you think of them, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can at the end of the presentations. Dr. Gyuk?
Hello, I'm Imre Gyuk, and I direct the Energy Storage Research Program at the Department of Energy, Office of Electricity. Today's webinar is going to look at the status of energy storage. In the little introduction, I'm going to not only look at the status, but mainly I will be looking forward to what we are expecting to see on the scene of energy storage and at the Office of Electricity in particular. Well, first of all, the Office of Electricity has established priorities. And there are 5 of them. There's, of course, Puerto Rico, which continues to exercise our minds and hearts. There is a North American energy system resiliency model, which we are building at the Office of Electricity. There is sensing technology, and there is cyber and physical threats. And also, gratifyingly, megawatt-scale grid energy storage is one of the priorities of the office. Now, megawatt-scale energy storage relies on 2 factors: cost and value, which hopefully are equal. Of course, at the moment, they are not exactly equal, or at least not equal at all times, which is precisely why we are involved in research to make it do so. The cost of the storage system depends, of course, on the storage device, the power electronics, and the balance of plant. So in order to make this work, we are doing research on materials, on devices, and systems. Materials means chemistry, finding new battery devices, essentially battery materials. Devices means the equipment itself, including power electronics, and then the systems means the way the whole thing works on the grid. The value of the storage system is equally important, and it depends on multiple benefit streams, and these come in both a monetized and an unmonetized form. The unmonetized form may often be the more important one, but the monetized one is what we have to go by. In order to further the emergence of true values for storage systems, we are doing deployments that go together with benefit valuation, and we are working on valuation itself. We are working on policy, and we are working on finance, to mention just a few of them. So it's all about building effective business cases. In the past, we have established or been a substantial partner in establishing frequency regulation, substation upgrade deferral, and demand charge reduction as important benefit streams that either in combination or even by themselves can lead to a viable business case. Currently, we are trying to establish and concentrate the unmonetized benefits more strongly. In particular, resiliency, both as seen from the consumer and as seen from the grid. Military energy assurance is one of those things that falls into this resiliency category. Emergency preparedness in the extremes of weather and other occurrences. In the future, we would like to look at peakers and transmission congestion. So that's the outline of where we are and where we would like to be going. In order to support this, we have 20 deployment projects which we are involved in. And in particular, we are doing evaluations for those projects. Sometimes before, certainly after monitoring after the project is built. We are hosting regional public utility corporation workshops. We sponsor the STAP webinars, as you have seen. We work on codes and standards, trying to establish both safety and operational regulatory structures. We, of course, have the Global Energy Storage Database. We have developed a valuation tool, the so-called QUEST program, and we have the policy database. We also run financial summits, which bring together the world of finance to consider how to fund storage and storage research. On the other hand, there are, of course, also obstacles and impediments to commercialization. There is safety and reliability. Safety is obvious. The number of battery fires, which we have had in recent years, has been quite astonishing. And it has had direct results by some companies warning users to keep their state of charge down to 75%. Reliability, we are establishing a reliability research center at P&L and project elsewhere at Sandia and Oak Ridge. Of importance are the ecological and social issues which are emerging. Having cobalt mined by little boys in the Congo is not really acceptable, and neither is depletion of aquifers due to lithium mining. These things will have to be worked on, and of course they will have an effect on the price of batteries. And then finally, there are the issues of reuse, recycling, and disposal. Putting it on the garbage dump is not really an acceptable solution. Disposal, if necessary, has to be sanitary, but if we can do recycling and reuse, it's preferable. We have work going on secondary use of automotive batteries. Argonne has just started a major lab effort on recycling. So these things are indeed being worked on. For the batteries themselves, due to these problems and others, to have safe, inexpensive, and environmentally benign batteries, we have to look towards earth-abundant materials, the ones in the upper left-hand corner, including, well, the nearby ones. Those are the elements that we want to be working with. And indeed, we have put together a program that does that. And here are the cost goal for the technologies that we are focusing on at the Office of Electricity. These numbers are manufactured at scale, and they're, of course, only rough estimates. Lithium-ion batteries currently are at a level of $100 per kilowatt hours. This is talking about cells only. And I suspect once we consider the importance of recycling and the various ecological issues, these prices may go up slightly. Vanadium batteries, flow batteries in general, are down to about $300 per kilowatt hours, which seems higher than lithium, but that number is at the cell level, whereas this level includes the stack and much of the power electronics. The new focus areas bring in zinc manganese oxide, which has been around for a while as a primary battery, but we are talking about a rechargeable version and hopefully one that uses both available electrons, and we may go as low as $50 per kilowatt hour. Low temperature sodium iodide based batteries may go down to $60 per kilowatt hour. And finally, aqueous soluble organic redox flow batteries, again, stack and power electronics, can be expected to go down to $125 per kilowatt hour. So there are options in the work for batteries that are fairly inexpensive and presumably fireproof and safe. I should mention also that lead acid, of course, is still in the game, and lead acid may go as low as $35 per kilowatt hour. So this is what we can look forward to in the future, and with new technology solutions, the cost will go down, safety and reliability will increase. With every successful project, the value proposition will continue to increase and things will be more cost effective in that respect. And as a result, jobs will be created. Thank you, and we now go on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Imre, and we will pass the baton to Dan Finn-Foley of Wood Mackenzie to give us the look back at the past year for energy storage in the United States.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. My name again is Dan Finn-Foley. Thank you so much to CESA and STAP DOE in general for hosting me today. I am a member of Wood Mackenzie Power and Renewables, part of the broader Wood Mackenzie family, global organization focusing on upstream oil and gas, metals and mining, chemicals, and my little hamlet in this big organization is in the Power and Renewables team on the energy storage team there. So I focus on analyzing the energy storage market, mostly the front of the meter perspective. So I wouldn't say I'm biased towards front of the meter energy storage, but my expertise is definitely biased towards front of the meter energy storage. So I'll be able to answer whatever I can there. And you can see my little bubble there in Boston. Although, as a personal note, we've already covered my bio here, I am working remotely from snowy Providence, Rhode Island today. So if you hear a cabin-fevered 2-year-old bust into my home office and start talking about trains, I ask you to just take it in stride and, maybe learn a thing or two about trains. For instance, the other day I learned that trains are sometimes blue. Exciting stuff. It'll be just like, remember that BBC reporter where the kid barged in? So hopefully I'll go viral as well. But hopefully it won't be talking about trains today. I really want to be focusing on the U.S. energy storage market in 2018 and what happened, focusing on, starting with deployment trends, telling the story of the market in the U.S., seeing the technology and system price trends that have driven those deployments, along with the market drivers for them. Take a look at our outlook and then highlight some of the trends that I foresee being big in 2019. A quick note on this: we do publish our quarterly our energy storage monitor quarterly, and that's where we get most of these updated deployment trends, etc. We're just a little too early for the Q1 2019 report, which will have the full 2018 numbers. So I'll be presenting our numbers from our previous report, but I'm going to be giving you sneak peeks into the year in review numbers. So please do not share them outside of this actually very expansive group of attendees. Of course you can share them, but these are preliminary numbers subject to change before the final publication comes out around the first week of March. So I'll try to provide you some additional context from the numbers that I have printed out here, and obviously with follow-up questions as well. Happy to answer any of those. So with that, I like to start with deployment trends because I think it paints such a beautiful picture of the energy storage market. And Dr. Gyuk, you put this perfectly when you said it's about cost versus value. The deployment trends by quarter for energy storage in the U.S. tell that story really dramatically. You can see, the market was nascent here. Pilot programs ruled the day, mostly in the front of the meter space. And then in 2014 into 2015, you saw a big spike in the market. A lot of you may know that this was due to the PJM frequency regulation market. A lot of systems were able to bid in here and make a lot of money because the value was so high, with lots of very high clearing prices, especially during polar vortex, etc., causing people to move into this space. Costs also declined enough to make it relevant for energy storage, partially because there was such a low duration requirement for energy storage systems to participate in this market. After that, the market became saturated, rule changes came into effect, so we got back into that sort of up and down mindset. But we started seeing the emergence of non-residential energy storage, primarily through the California Self-Generation Incentive Program. So we already have two threads in this graph that's just showing megawatt deployments. And then the big spike here in Q4 2016, Q1 2017. Driven, obviously with a nascent market, deployments can still be driven pretty significantly by a small number of projects. And that's what happened here, but this was due to the Aliso Canyon expedited procurement, primarily. That was a huge natural gas leak in Southern California that required, it put the fuel security of some natural gas peaker plants at risk. Energy storage came in, they built about 104 megawatts of systems in only about 8 months. And by all measurements, those systems have performed really well. This caused a big spike here as we saw some deployments come in, at the last minute to meet the demands caused by the leak that took place less than a year before. Since then, we've seen pretty consistent deployments in the market, but the real story is 2018 has become the year of residential energy storage. So exciting. This is still generally an emotional investment. When we're talking about cost versus value, cost is still high for residential storage. Value economic is still low, but there is a lot of non-economic value in residential storage still. And as we get time of use rates increasing in popularity, net metering reforms making it better to self-consume your solar energy, this trend is going to continue. I'll give you the sneak peek into Q4 2018. It's going to be high. We rose from 2017 to 2018 in total by about 40 to 50% in megawatt terms. Pretty darn good growth rate for an emerging market. And the market from Q3 2018 to Q4 2018 is set to almost double based on our preliminary numbers. Now, the great thing about being in energy storage is if they pay you by the slide, you're set, because every time you talk about megawatts for energy storage, you have to talk about megawatt hours as well. Megawatt hours is a very different metric from megawatts, and you can see that when you compare these two graphs. These are the same graph, the same projects that are in the ground, but here we're measuring megawatt hours, the total megawatt capacity multiplied by the system's duration. The effects are obvious. For the PJM systems with short duration, you had a much larger spike in the megawatt hour scale. On a megawatt scale. In the megawatt hour scale, because these were all 15, 20, 30-minute duration systems, the spike was not actually that big. Meanwhile, for Aliso Canyon, all of those projects were 4 hours in duration, meaning that they were much higher spikes in terms of megawatt hours. From here, front-of-the-meter systems have varied. Some short-duration systems, some longer-duration systems. But the really exciting news is Q4 2018. Q4 2018 is going to beat these records handily. Quite handily, actually. Even from the front-of-the-meter side, residential side, non-residential, every metric is going to set a new record for quarter-by-quarter deployments of energy storage. This is driven by a number of factors. Lots of non-residential deployments, continuing year of residential energy storage numbers, but also a lot of very large front-of-the-meter systems came online in Q4. A 5-hour solar plus storage system in Hawaii, a large project in Texas and California, and even non-traditional markets are starting to drive this more and more. Projects came online in Minnesota. Earlier in 2018, we had projects solar paired in Florida. And I'll get into the policy mechanisms and drivers around this. But again, Dr. Gyuk, getting back to your cost versus value question, that intersection is emerging, that point where cost meets value, sooner than a lot of people in the market anticipated, and the market's responding. We're seeing a lot of interest in not only the traditional markets with policy mechanisms in place, California, New York, Massachusetts, et cetera, but in these non-traditional markets where utilities are looking at solar plus storage competing directly with conventional generation for peaking applications, where ancillary services make sense, where demand charges start making energy storage competitive for non-residential applications. Really exciting stuff. So expect this number, somewhere up here. We're looking at maybe a growth of, for total 2018 numbers, as much as 60 to 80% increase in megawatt hour deployments from 2017 to 2018. 2018 was a big year. I'll get into it in a couple slides. 2019 onward, going to be even bigger years. Quick look at the top energy storage markets for Q3 2018. These are not generally surprising results, and I'll go into why. Let me talk about the total 2018 numbers from our preliminary data. For residential, the numbers still stay the same. California is number 1 in 2018. Hawaii is number 3. And then any market that we don't track individually will fall into this all others market. So think maybe Minnesota, Florida, South Dakota, states that generally don't have direct policy incentives causing us to track them directly. Every time we do the monitor, we review the states that we track independently, and we start pulling others out. So for instance, a couple quarters ago, we started tracking Nevada and Colorado individually. And a couple of years before that, we started tracking Massachusetts, New Jersey, even outside of the PJM market individually. This category, this all others category, actually came in second for residential in 2018. It's essentially showing the diversification, geographic diversification of interest in residential energy storage. Puerto Rico was a big driver for this one in 2018 after Hurricane Maria. Residential customers obviously seeking more resilience, and that resilience trend is going to be a continuing factor. The non-residential market for 2018 is also California, Hawaii, New York. California is going to remain the king for non-residential. For 2018, it was about 50 times the market size of any other market, driven almost exclusively through the self-generation incentive program. New York came in third, though, which was pretty exciting. New York we see as a big opportunity for non-residential energy storage. An array of new policies there, a lot of new opportunities for customer bill management, potentially even wholesale market participation, which I'll get into later. We see New York sort of cementing itself as the number 2 market coming in for non-residential. Here it was number 3. And then California took the top spot for the front of the meter space. And then Hawaii took third with some late-breaking deployments. New York was the leader for Q3 2018, but actually all others, again, was the number 2 with more than 30 megawatts deployed. This was from projects in Minnesota, Florida, as I mentioned earlier, even as I mentioned, South Dakota, a lot of different projects coming online, diverse range of value propositions, solar plus storage, ancillary services, capacity applications, 8-hour transmission and distribution deferral applications. There's such an array of opportunity here that these states and markets and policymakers and industry stakeholders are taking advantage of. So a quick look at some of the investment that's driving this as an opportunity. 2018 was actually down slightly in terms of overall investments from 2017. Generally, I would say that that's because there was pretty much a gold rush in mergers and acquisitions in 2017. You saw a lot of energy storage companies trading hands. If you didn't, you're one of the few energy storage companies remaining that hasn't been bought up by a massive oil major, et cetera. And more than that, even in the past quarter, the past 2 months, we've seen major acquisitions. We have Shell acquiring Sonnen. We have Tesla acquiring Maxwell. This gold rush continues. One note about gold rushes is the true lesson of gold rush is that there wasn't any long-term wealth created from the gold rush. This is something that an advisor of mine in grad school told me that has always stuck with me. The true value that came out of the gold rush was in denim. Those companies are the ones that, from the gold rush, took off and became big, the long-lasting value. So there's a gold rush in M&A for energy storage. Everybody's looking to buy that expertise. The question is, who's making the genes after this gold rush? What are these companies doing with these acquisitions that they've made? Have they settled for some sort of short-term injection of knowledge or innovation or software into their conversation, or is there something longer term here, strategy-wise? We saw VC remain relatively stable. Project financing dropped a bit in the Q1 through Q3 2018. Q4 2018 didn't move these numbers too significantly. Deal counts were down a little bit, but mostly, again, that's just because of this surge in 2016 and 2017 as the hype sort of reached its peak, and most of these companies simply got bought. So getting into what's driving these trends a little bit more. The first topic I want to get into is technology, and this has been a boring slide for the past couple of years, tracking the various technology percentage of deployments. This is across front of the meter and residential and non-residential. You can see that since Q4 2014, lithium-ion has had a 94% market share or higher. No other technology is really competing here. There was one large other technology in Q3 2014. We have a full data set of projects that have been put online in the grid. Q3 2014 was a pretty small installation quarter. So, that one project tipped the scales. But lithium-ion has been dominating, and that's the story of this slide. And the reason for that is because of cost declines. Getting quickly into our front-of-the-meter system prices, where they are now and where they're going in the future. This is for a mid-sized energy storage system. It varies pretty significantly. We report these in dollars per kilowatt. If you want to get it in dollars per kilowatt hour, you can divide by the hour duration here. For 4-hour, we're at a median of about $2,200 per kilowatts, and that's going to be falling still to $1,750 or so by 2020. For a 2-hour system, we're at about $1,475, and we're going to be getting down towards $1,150. Again, these scale differently depending on the duration. The percentage of the cost stack that is based on batteries versus balance of system, inverters, et cetera, is going to vary pretty significantly. Not a whole lot of data on the 30-minute type systems, but we see it at around $825, and obviously we've included the ranges here, falling to about $675 by 2020. And I want to get into why this is because, again, it comes down to cost. And so here's our historical cost tracking put together by a colleague of mine, Mitali Gupta, who really did a deep dive into this in 2018 because it's such a critical question. she broke this down into these 4 phases. The sort of phase 1, battery cost declines are falling. You see that this is piggybacking this lithium-ion trend on the success of consumer electronics, massive scale-ups in the amount of lithium-ion batteries being created worldwide. As we started getting into actual energy storage deployments during the PJM boom and other areas, the BOS costs started dropping precipitously through 2015 and 2016. This really got us into the golden age of price declines. But that continued into this sort of phase 3. The reductions are continuing, but they're starting to level off. And then in phase 4, we start seeing a more mature market where price declines are a bit more stable, still declining at a pretty darn good rate, but a bit more stable. Now, this is one of the areas in the presentation where I wish I could share more of our hard numbers from the next quarter. So I'm going to, just don't tell anyone I did. These numbers have been revised, these percent decreases, due to a couple of factors. Dr. Gyuk mentioned the raw materials portion of this. There have been raw materials constraints, particularly cobalt. Those potentially have eased a little bit, but in the U.S. market, there has been almost a supply shortage. And you can trace that back to South Korea, some of the policies influencing there, causing a lot of those suppliers to start supplying directly into that market. Our price decline forecast has been changed up a little bit here. So, you have this minus 14%, but then for 2018, where you have that minus 14% again, expect that to get bumped up quite a bit, up to negative 10%, negative 8%, and then the other numbers as well, to the point where we see the battery rack level systems sort of crossing that 150 threshold a year later than they otherwise would have pre-price constraints. As greater production capacity comes online, obviously people are ramping this up significantly. These supply constraints are going to be resolved, probably by the end of H1 2019. These vendors are going to start experiencing greater economies of scale, improvements in energy density, all continuing the earlier trends of significant price declines. So we see that the battery rack prices are going to still drop below $150 per kilowatt hour over the next 5 years. How this translates to behind the meter prices, there's a higher range for these, simply because there's less consolidation in the market. Competition is not, again, as much determined on economic cost, simply because there's so many incentives and players, and it's a little trickier. There's less of a competitive RFP structure, pricing, et cetera. So you see these large ranges. These are tightening though, especially the non-residential side as that market matures. The residential will do as well. But we're down to about $3K per kilowatt for residential and 1.8 for non-residential. So getting into some of the more meat of this, I've talked a lot of numbers. Now I really want to talk into the market drivers behind these numbers. We have that intersection. We've seen costs declining. We've seen the places where energy storage has been providing value. Recognizing value is such an important component of energy storage deployments, energy storage market potential. Energy storage can do so many different things, but actually recognizing the fact that it can is a significant market barrier. We've seen that a lot in wholesale markets, which I'll get into in a moment. But let's get to some discussions of major policies here. In the front of the meter policy landscape from Q4 2018, there was a ton of stuff going on. One of the biggest ones was wholesale market activity, where ISOs were complying with FERC Order 841, I'll talk about in a slide or two, essentially saying energy storage has to participate. But there were other activities going on as well, looking at this quarter energy storage as a transmission asset. ERCOT is installing potentially a new ancillary services product suite, which is a long time coming. Recently, we've had New York NYSERDA issuing a storage order there, the New York PSC issuing white papers, Green Bank's RFPs that are ongoing. We've seen Puerto Rico announce its potential resource plans, looking at hundreds of megawatts of energy storage potentially. Just this past week, we've had Arizona Public Service announcing that they were going to be procuring as much as, I think, 850 megawatts of energy storage. Now, that is one that I find absolutely fascinating. Arizona Public Service. This was a utility that had 4 megawatts of energy storage on its grid when it looked into planning its IRP. Its IRP, Integrated Resource Plan, was released in 2017, and it had 7 portfolios of potential resources. And the one it picked had 500 megawatts of energy storage through 2032. That's amazing. Going from 4 megawatts to 500 megawatts in an IRP, it really showed you how much value they're placing on energy storage. Now, jump a year and a half later, Arizona Public Service announces that they are going to be procuring 850 megawatts by 2025. In a year and a half, costs have fallen so much and value recognition has increased so much that APS is proposing to almost double the amount of energy storage it is going to procure half as soon as what its IRP suggested. That is a remarkable development. That's a 1.5 year change. That's a signpost to me that this is a market that is evolving rapidly and is going to continue to evolve rapidly. It'll be keeping all of us at Wood Mackenzie and everyone on this phone call, I'm sure, very busy. This is, all of these policies. Here are some that we've highlighted in our previous ESM that I haven't mentioned yet. You have a lot of activity in New York. Obviously, California continues to be a leader. But other markets, Nevada Energy's latest renewable energy RFP gives you the option for storage. Alabama Power's latest capacity RFP lets you choose storage. Gyuk is investing $500 million in energy storage over the coming years. This isn't just a, Starbucks in Massachusetts and California talking about energy storage. When you have Alabama, this past quarter, Georgia, the Carolinas talking about energy storage, this tells you that it is about cost. This is not an emotional decision anymore. This is now about providing the least cost solution as a utility to customers. And that's a big deal. If you can start telling a utility, this is your least cost solution, your market is about to take off. And that's exactly what's going to happen for front of the meter energy storage. I'll dive into this a little bit more. I wanted to put this up here just to provide some context that, yes, this is a technology that's taking off majorly in some significant markets. You have energy storage mandates in New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, California. You have other policies like a Clean Peak Standard in Massachusetts that could be spurring tons of investment. But increasingly, this is going to be an economic question. What about wind energy curtailment in Southwest Power Pool? What about all of that sort of nearly stranded solar energy in the western part of Texas? What about Florida? It's the Sunshine State, for goodness sake. They just announced that they're putting a massive investment into solar there. Is storage going to play a role there? And in almost all these cases, as costs continue to decline, the answer is going to be yes. From the behind the meter side, it's all about sort of expanding beyond this California SGIP incentive program. There are a lot of programs out there that are incentivizing that. Again, the front of the meter space keeps me busy enough, but I try to keep up with what's going on here. But this is one of those places where outside of the emotional investors, you need to see a little bit of incentive there. The big ones, of course, SGIP, and then in New York, we see a lot of investment through the New York Sun program. And then the big new exciting one is the Massachusetts SMART program. That is really going to start driving a ton of behind the meter storage in Massachusetts, including community solar storage, which is really exciting. This sort of solar and storage are increasingly paired together in the front of the meter space, but in the behind the meter space, especially in the residential space, they really are joined at the hip in that respect. A lot of other things have been going on with the behind the meter space in the past quarter or so. Proposed rules in California revising SGIP with greenhouse gas emission reductions, for instance. More action out of Massachusetts as they clarify how storage capacity is, who's sort of in control of that capacity. There's a lot of things going on in the behind the meter space. Still a nascent market, but as we saw in the pages earlier, this is increasingly going to be a major market. Diving into FERC quickly, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. Boy, if you thought CESA and all those things were acronym soup, try being in the energy space for a couple of weeks. I hope I'm explaining all of them. If not, you can ask me a question at the end here. They issued a proposed rulemaking saying that energy storage has to be able to participate in wholesale markets. The idea of FERC is that it's preserving competition, and FERC's argument was that energy storage is unduly discriminated against. This had after comment period, they issued the actual order, FERC Order 841, and it gave a time period for the ISOs to go back to the stakeholder process and propose mechanisms of participation for energy storage. This could be a game changer for for energy storage, the ability to participate in wholesale markets. It wouldn't necessarily launch 10 gigawatts of energy storage, because at the end of the day, even if the rules are the same, you still have to get on the field and win the game and compete. It's not at all clear, FERC shouldn't be in the business of picking winners and losers. The idea is to provide a technology agnostic approach that recognizes that storage is unique, which it is. In this case, some of the mechanisms that they wanted ISOs to take into account: ensuring that energy storage can participate in these markets, ensuring that it can control itself, it can be dispatched, set the clearing price, recognizing that it has unique operational characteristics through some sort of, whether that's a bidding parameter or other means, and some other minor effects. Now, the ISOs put together their proposals, and those all came out in December, and they were bombarded with comments, and I've been doing a deep dive into this as well. Generally, I would say that most of the independent system operators are broadly in compliance with the order. They all take energy storage eligibility into account, but again, this is very much a round peg in a square hole kind of problem. You have energy markets which are designed around conventional generation, since that's really what it was. Energy storage is not conventional generation. It's duration limited. It can be positive. It can be negative. In the ERCOT market, if you have an energy storage system, you register as two different projects, one as a load source from when you're charging, and one as a generation source from when you're discharging. The ERCOT grid does not know that that's the same battery doing both of those things. This is, really a process to make the square peg compliant with a round hole. Most markets did a good job of adjusting their market rules to conform, but a couple of the markets seemed like they were trying to say, well, we're a square hole, so we're just going to make the energy storage system a bit more square as well, which is really not in the direction the FERC order was taking. Some of the biggest complaints from the community, from comments from the industry, the biggest one is duration requirements. There's this question here: account for the physical and operational characteristics of energy storage. If you have a duration requirement saying you have to be able to discharge indefinitely, that would seem to go against this. This has an operational characteristic of energy storage, is that it's duration limited. Some markets instituted, say, a 4-hour requirement. The industry said, yeah, 4 hours, we're already there, that's fine. PJM was the biggest offender. They have a 10-hour requirement for their capacity market. Energy storage stakeholders are saying that that's not in compliance. I think PJM, playing devil's advocate here, would say that this comes back to what is it technically capable of providing, this wording here. If I require unlimited capacity and you are an energy limited resource, I would argue that you cannot technically provide that. This is still up in the air, whether that's going to move forward or not. It all depends on how FERC interprets this as well. There's some other questions here, including things like telemetry and ISO control of operating parameters and dispatch. One ISO included state of charge management through economic bidding, which to me doesn't seem at all foolproof. So there's a lot of next steps. Beyond 2019, in the rest of 2019, as this gets resolved, it's going to be a pretty big deal, as these are due to be implemented by the end of 2019. One other note to mention is that a lot of these ISO compliance filings kind of skirt the issue of behind-the-meter energy storage. The original notice of proposed rulemaking included a proposed rule saying that any energy resource needs to be able to aggregate to participate in markets. Stakeholder feedback from the ISOs was that this was a real heavy lift and that the whole system would need to be redesigned in some cases. So the order when it came out was just 1/2 of the proposed rules, which is the energy storage component. That aggregation of distributed energy resources is kind of the next step, and that's going to be beyond 2019, the next front in sort of the FERC discussion. But this had big effects. What does this do? It provides certainty. If you are an energy storage system participating in Massachusetts SMART program, you now know that you're going to be able to play into these markets if you obviously meet the eligibility requirements. That's a really big deal, because before there wasn't any clear mechanism for participating outside of, say, as a demand response resource, where the ISO doesn't even know that you're an energy storage resource there. It just knows that the load profile of the aggregate system has changed. This is going to be about direct participation. And if you can have direct participation, sure, you have to have a project that's cheap enough. You have to have one that's reliable enough to not get penalized for availability. You have to be able to compete, which is, of course, a very big deal. All those things aside, this at least lets you know that you're in the game. Looking at some of the effect of this, I wanted to point out our U.S. front-of-the-meter pipeline. What this is a slice of our energy storage project database, showing all projects that we track that are announced in some level or not, or under construction, not projects that are installed. So every quarter I take a snapshot, how big's the pipeline, how many projects have been announced, and you'll notice a couple of jumps here in Q2. This is due to massive cluster applications in the interconnection queues, which we add here. Most interconnection queue requests are not going to actually move forward towards actual projects because it's a bit more speculative. You reserve an interconnection agreement and then you may not move forward with the project, etc. But what it does show you is a general sense of the interest in these markets. You know, we're up at 30 gigawatts or so here, but I would say only a fraction of that is actually going to come online. As we've advanced through the quarters, we've seen more and more projects added to this pipeline, whether they've been announced through interconnection queues, through utility RFP awards, direct contact local channels, etc. And then in Q3 2018, we saw a massive surge. And what's even more interesting, and I guess through Q1 and through into all of 2018, let's say, the coolest thing about this is that for the most part, as you can see here, this is broken down by percentages. We were up around 80% of the market of announced projects was California. Now, California actually made up, I think in Q1 2018, less than half of the market. Again, this is that point about diversification of this market. One other point I should make, this is all front-of-the-meter energy projects that we're tracking through this. After FERC Order 841, the NOPR into the order, we saw surges in the amount of systems that were suggested for all others, in this case, markets in Mid-Continent System Operator and SPP. We saw massive surges in projects from Massachusetts in the ISO interconnection queue. A lot of these Arizona projects were added, but some of these come from the California ISO interconnection queue, as well as some of the Nevada ones. And this has only continued in the next quarter. Expect this number to get right up to about the 35 gigawatt amount without a lot of interconnection queue announcements, just based on huge announcements from Puerto Rico, from Arizona. A lot of projects that are looking into Texas now, which is really exciting. I think we're above a gigawatt in that market, or actually 2 gigawatts in that market as of the latest quarter, of projects that are looking to interconnect in Western Texas, take advantage of that abundant solar energy. Huge opportunity here for energy storage, and it is diversifying. We see California starting to get squeezed by these other markets as we start seeing more and more things happening. This is always in flux. Some numbers are going to go down as projects fall off the interconnection queues or get pushed back. But what it's showing you is scale. We're seeing this market accelerate. The total pipeline is doubling. Deployments year over year are nearly doubling, and this is a trend that's only going to continue. You might ask, how much is it going to continue? And I wish I could say that I had planned that transition out. So let's dive into the outlook here, what we see happening over the next 5 years. What we see, 2018 came in, we were looking at somewhere around 338 for total numbers. It was actually a little bit lower than that, as we saw a couple of larger front-of-the-meter scale systems get pushed into early 2019. So it will come in above 300, but not by as much, and then accelerate from there. Through 2023, we see it's going to be a 3.8 gigawatt market, almost doubling from 2019, or more than doubling from 2019 to 2020. In our most recent forecast, these numbers have been bumped up, and 2024 continues to accelerate, though not as much. The ITC sort of wall in 2023 is going to slow the acceleration of deployments. It'll still increase them. 2020 is going to be one of the big inflection years for energy storage. Lots of systems are coming online there. A lot of utility procurements have this as the anticipated completion date. So expect a big spike then. Again, 2 slides for the price of 1. Let's take a look at how things look in terms of megawatt hour terms. In this case, you can see the spike is even larger. And this is because we're seeing a trend towards longer duration systems. A lot of solar paired systems are going to be 4-hour duration, potentially even longer, as in the case of Hawaii. Some 2 to 3. non-residential getting a slightly longer in duration, more capacity applications, fewer ancillary services applications, to the point where we're seeing 11.7 gigawatts by 2023, potentially as much as 14 by 2024. This 2020 number is going to be a big one. 2019 may get suppressed a little bit here, but 2020 is going to get up towards that 5 gigawatt hour deployment number. So once again, expect big things from the energy storage market in the next 5 years. Looking at this from a dollars perspective, I'm sure all the banks on the line are most excited about this part. 2018, our final numbers are looking like it's going to be close to around this number, about a $500 million market. That's set to double to 2019, and then double again to 2020, and then pretty much double again to 2024. This is, by the time we hit 2024, going to be almost a $5 billion market. This is driven by the raw deployments into this market, and follows pretty closely with the megawatt hour trends that we saw here. So looking at that 5-year total, I'll pause here for just another second since I don't want to rush past this since it's just absolutely massive. One thing that I want to point out is the share that behind the meter starts to play here. In our new forecast, behind the meter gets suppressed a little bit, and it actually loses. It's not 50% of the market, or it wasn't, back during these PJM booms. It starts to take the throne here, is more than 50% of the market, then may drop down for a little bit as we started to get more clarity on what markets are, more clarity on individual procurements. So where once we saw some projects that were 2022, we've seen that those are actually moving into 2021, and same for 2021 and 2020. So these numbers are going to spike a little bit from the front of the meter segment, but it's remarkable that the residential segment is going to be this large in 2023 through 2024. It is going to be a very big deal. 2018 was the year that residential energy storage emerged, but the next 5 years is when it's going to really explode into scale. So I wanted to highlight a couple of trends for 2019 and beyond, starting with hybrids, and then maybe highlighting a few things that we're talking about for the next 5 years. I love hybrid energy storage, specifically front of the meter. I did a presentation on it at our Energy Storage Summit in December that I believe you can watch online. And I wanted to hit a couple of points about that. Solar and storage is one of the biggest drivers of energy storage moving forward. 5 years from now, it may be 1 out of every 3 megawatts that's installed is solar paired. I think it may even be higher than that. It may be closer to 50%. Looking at the markets here, it's a pretty diverse range. We have 6 states, including Puerto Rico, that have a pretty significant amount of solar plus storage installed. 6 different states have a little bit installed. And that number at the bottom there, this is from December, that number is already woefully out of date. it's up by another couple hundreds of megawatts. And if you take into account some of the procurements that have been announced, we're at gigawatt scale, more than gigawatt scale. The point that I want to make here is that solar plus storage economically is starting to compete with peaker plants. It's starting to compete as a more conventional generation resource, which is absolutely unreal, if you ask me. With the ITC, of course, that's a big factor, but as costs decrease, it's going to happen more and more. I'll highlight a few data points from our latest DSM that I don't believe we were that I was able to show here, as they're still through the preliminary review process. We saw solar plus storage PPA prices, third-party contracts with utilities decreased dramatically, and nowhere did we see this more than Hawaii. This was a really big deal. The Hawaiian electric companies, the HECO procurements that were announced over the past couple of months, well, they were announced back in October. We have the contracts and the terms and the PPAs. Let's go back in time. In 2016, there was a solar plus storage PPA that came in at 14 cents per kilowatt hour. In 2017, we had a procurement come in at 11 cents per kilowatt hour. In 2019, the result was 8 cents per kilowatt hour. That's more than a 40% decline in solar plus storage PPA prices in the last 3 years. That's absolutely unbelievable. Because of that, we're starting to see this market for solar plus storage expand. It's an APS, Arizona Public Service, they mentioned that they picked solar plus storage because it was the best cost option. They were letting it compete directly with other technologies, and it won. How big a deal is that? Yeah, Arizona's super sunny, but come on, that's still a really big deal. Other markets where it's sunny, West Texas, Florida, even Minnesota has seen these deployments. This is a trend that's going to really expand across the United States. Huge important signpost. This is just a week old, and I haven't dug deep into this very much, but I wanted to share it. In Arizona Public Service's announcement about what resources they're pursuing, obviously they're looking at solar, they're looking at massive amounts of storage. That was the big headline. But they entered into a contract for a natural gas plant. There's a new natural gas moratorium in Arizona. So they went with a contract with an existing plant, but instead of a 20-year contract, it's a 7-year contract, which they did specifically because they see the land moving underneath them. A year and a half ago, as I mentioned before, it was 500 megawatts by 2032. Now it's 850 megawatts by 2025, plus another 60 or something more. They're saying in 7 years, I don't even know if we're going to want this natural gas. So we need the flexibility to take it or leave it. That is I know I say this a lot, this word, but that is a huge signpost. It's absolutely remarkable that energy storage plus solar is so competitive that it is affecting the kind of contracts that a natural gas plant can receive. This is becoming an existential, I don't want to say threat, an existential disruptor for the entire energy market. Now, on the other side of this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is wind plus storage. Wind plus storage is still a solution in search of a problem, is the way that I like to describe it. Unlike solar plus storage, wind plus storage very rarely takes advantage of the ITC. Wind systems almost always take the production tax credit, much more lucrative. So when they take the production tax credit, there's really no opportunity for taking the investment tax credit. It's one or the other. Even so, I see this developing into a really exciting opportunity over the next 5 years. Mostly in the Northeast, which I've highlighted here. Now, there's tons of good incentives for energy storage, not a whole lot of wind energy, but there will be as we have all of these offshore procurements that are coming in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, all down that eastern seaboard. And that's going to become a match made in heaven. One of the reasons I think that this is super exciting, I'll mention one point in Montana, there was a look at a wind plus storage as a capacity asset. They were negotiating a PPA for 80 megawatt wind farm with an 80 megawatt 4-hour duration battery storage system. That's now sort of fallen through. The utilities pulled back on it. I think it's actually in front of the Montana Board of Public Utilities. But it led me to ask the question. So I went through and I used NREL data and I looked at how often you could charge with wind, and when a peak event came, assuming one comes every day, how often you would meet that peak. And if you have 4 hours to meet 50% nameplate capacity in a windy region, you can actually get up to 85, 90, 93% availability. That's availability similar to a gas peaker, which is not available all the time just due to maintenance or technical issues, et cetera. So this was a really big deal to me. But the Northeast is the most exciting one, and that's because of the Clean Peak Standard. This will be sort of one of the last points I make. The Clean Peak Standard is absolutely a huge opportunity for energy storage, depending on how it's implemented, and we don't yet know how it's going to be implemented. I see it as a natural conclusion of two distinct trends here. I should have kept the PowerPoint of this, where I go through this and I really draw you in as an audience, and I go through one block by block. So I've spoiled myself here. But the first trend was actually getting secure megawatt hours of energy. That started with an energy market first they, Edison invented this whole thing, maybe Tesla, depending on who you believe. This Deregulation Act in '92 was the first thing that said, hey, let's start being competitive about how we procure the megawatt hours of energy that we need. Then states started to say, hang on a second, there's a societal cost to carbon, there's a societal cost to fossil fuels. What if not all megawatt hours are created equal? That came about in the first renewable portfolio standard in Iowa. Great trivia question, by the way, if you're ever at a party predominantly full of energy nerds like us. Hawaii is a good example. They have 100% renewable energy requirement. At the same time, there's a parallel discussion happening in these markets saying not all hours have the same need. This is where the reliability pricing model came in PJM, this capacity market, saying we need you during certain hours more than we need you at other hours. So we have not all megawatt hours are created equal, and not all hours are created equal. At the end of the day, joining those two things together, we have the Massachusetts Act to Advance Clean Energy. This in 2018 created the Clean Peak Standard, which for the first time really combined these two things and said, hey, not all megawatt hours at certain hours of the day are created equal. That is, I think, the next logical step. These are two distinct trains of thought that converge to the same place. The Clean Peak Standard would essentially award you providing renewable energy during times of peak demand. That is an absolutely huge deal for energy storage because you can charge wind during windy periods and discharge during peak hours and receive perhaps $1 per megawatt hour credit or $1 per megawatt capacity credit. The implementation is not directly clear how it's going to be implemented across a variety of states. They're still looking at this. But this is one of the biggest upsides to me for energy storage. I'm not able to get to all of the exciting things in 2019 in 40 minutes. I could keep talking about this for the next year and a half if I needed to. But keep an eye on FERC 841, how things are implemented there. Keep an eye on Clean Peak Standards, solar plus storage PPAs. Take a look at cost declines. How are they going to be advancing over the next couple of quarters and years? We'll be covering this, of course, in more detail in our energy storage monitor, which will be available. And yeah, plenty of events coming up where we'll be discussing that as well. Looking at the time, I've already run over my time, so I'm just going to cut myself off and ask if there are any questions that we can answer.
Yes, there are, and thanks very much. That was really amazing. That was a very, very exciting presentation, and it seems as though, as you say, there are several inflection points converging here, both in terms of cost declines and in terms of policies being implemented in various states and at the federal level. So it's going to be very interesting to see how some of these projections pan out over the next couple of years and beyond. We do have a lot of questions. We have about 25 minutes in which to answer as many as we can. Some of them are directed toward Dan, and some are directed toward Imre. So we will try to get you both in on, and some of them, of course, are general, in which case jump in if you have something to say. So we'll start with somebody who's asking regarding the Wood Mackenzie cost decline projections. The question is, what new battery chemistry has the best chance of disrupting the cost decline projections before 2022? And it's a bit of a speculation question.
Well, I'm happy to dive in as well. If the other Dan, we should probably specify which Dan they're directed to as well.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's Dan Finn-Foley. The question is toward the Wood Mackenzie cost decline projections. What's the chemistry that has the best chance of disrupting those projections?
Absolutely. So short term, it's going to be lithium ion. We don't foresee alternative chemistries reaching scale quickly enough, simply because lithium ion has such a head start due to first, consumer electronics, and second, EVs requiring so many lithium ion batteries. The industry has been able to piggyback on that for a long time. What I do see happening, though, is the emergence of alternative lithium ion chemistries, ratios of raw materials within those chemistries, LFP versus NMC. Specifically, LMP has been a bit insulated from the price declines that we've seen. And then looking beyond the 5 to 10 year horizon, I'm sure that my friends at Sandia and DOE have a good long-term view of this as well. I personally feel like solid state is going to be one of the elements that drives us further. Solid state potentially having more density, having the ability to provide a battery that is, hey, maybe better in EVs, which prompts it to be made at more mass scales as EVs gain prominence as well. That's what I would say for short and long term.
Great. Similar question for Dr. Gyuk. The questioner says, you only discussed batteries. There are other technologies for energy storage, such as compressed air, hydrogen, etc. Are any of the demonstrations being funded by DOE OE outside the area of battery technology? In other words, any other storage technologies being funded? I don't know if Imre is still on the line. Imre, are you still there? Okay. Dan
Okay, just
Borneo, can you jump?
unmuted myself.
Great, thank you.
Yes, compressed air energy storage, of course. We have had several projects that we were interested in. At the moment, most of those didn't pan out for various reasons. But there are nonetheless compressed air energy storage projects which are intended to come online. One of the problems with compressed air energy storage is that very capital cost intensive. It costs very much to investment to just build these things. Hydro, of course, is around as always. Problem there is finding sites, additional sites to the ones that are already occupied. Most of the good ones are occupied. Most of the other good ones are almost inaccessible from a point of view of siting permits. There are novel ways of doing pumped hydro. For example, underground or underground to underground even, that might be considered. And then there is liquid air, which has potential. The other technologies that were mentioned, like hydrogen and ammonia perhaps, and of course demand response, are important in smoothing out and balancing the flow between generation and load, but they are not strictly speaking storage, because the way we define storage, it's electrical energy in, electrical energy out. Nonetheless, they are important. So is thermal storage, which might be any energy in, but thermal energy out. They're all important. They all have their place.
Okay, great. And Imre, while we have you unmuted, somebody else is asking whether DOE is working on flywheels or rail or other non-battery technologies, anything that you didn't already speak to.
Flywheels are certainly being funded. We funded the original work that led to some of the very first frequency regulation projects with flywheels. There is new work on very high power flywheels that would be extremely useful, for example, in urban rail, to ameliorate the effect of urban rail on the municipal electrical energy balance, because every time the train starts up or slows down, that represents huge fluctuations on the grid. If you put in a flywheel in between, you can absorb that and reclaim the energy without involving the grid, which is a nice way to do it. The Massachusetts, the Boston MBTA is interested, and so is the New York City subway. We may well be seeing some of those technologies.
Okay, great, thank you. Here's another question for Dan Finn-Foley. What do you think would be the top implementation issue for the design of the Clean Peak standard that would ensure a market for storage?
Oh man, do we have another hour here? Can I really dive in? You're going to make me choose a
dive
topic.
in for a fraction of an hour, maybe.
Fraction of an hour. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just say 2 or 3/60ths of an hour.
There's a derating joke to be made there, but it's escaping me. All right. The key implementation barrier is how they measure capacity. When you're talking about Clean Peak Standard, it comes back to those two distinct value propositions, green and available during certain times of the day. If you're talking about available during certain hours, let's say you're a solar resource and the peak in Massachusetts runs from, I don't know, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. During a certain time during the year, you may be providing a pretty significant amount of energy at 4 p.m., but say during the winter, when 8 p.m. rolls around, the sun is down, you're not providing any energy. How does the Clean Peak measure your contribution to meeting the peak? Is it just based off the megawatt hours that you provided, added all together? Or is it like most capacity markets where it says we are going to provide you some sort of value prorated towards the minimum amount of capacity you provided? In that case, does that solar farm get credit for zero because it didn't provide any energy during the 8-hour window? Or do you implement some sort of tiered system where it measures it at the end of each hour or at the end of every 2 hours? That is a massive barrier, because if you get just your megawatt hours contribution, then say you're a wind farm, you don't really care that much you're providing megawatt hours, that's fine. If it's based off the capacity that you provide, that takes the energy storage opportunity from a 5 to a 500, because now every renewable energy resource, depending on the amount of value that's created, the amount of funding or money, dollar per megawatt hour credits are available, every renewable energy resource that's built is going to want to have enough energy storage to meet its nameplate during those windows. Now, that's all up in the air, but that could be a huge barrier, how you implement the actual measuring of capacity. Other barriers exist. One more that I would want to highlight would be, how do you measure the peak? Is it duck curve, where it's a net demand kind of thing, where you subtract out solar because that's where the true peak is? Or is it based on just the total peak demand? Is it based off of, how do you scale it up over time? If your goal is to try to implement some sort of energy during peak hours. And one existential threat that doesn't get talked about very much is, what if we leapfrog this? What if we all go Hawaii's route and go for 100% renewable energy? There are bills in front of a lot of legislatures that are looking to do that. California has 100% clean, very different from 100% green, by the way, 100% renewable. But that is another opportunity that this could be irrelevant if we've now reached a point where policy is moving beyond just measuring those two things and saying, nope, we're just transitioning to 100% renewable. That's my elevator pitch. I could keep going for a while, but follow up with me directly, and I'd be happy to talk about it in more detail.
Right.
Seems to me for the peak thing, what we need is a pay for performance standard.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to sort of getting at as part of that capacity question. And there would be some sort of performance metric. If you have just $1 per megawatt hour credit, that implies some sort of performance metric already that's built in, because you're only getting paid if you provide the energy during those hours. And so that it partially already exists, but if you have to codify it in some way, and how they do that is going to present a huge source of risk for storage and renewables.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has to do with adjusting current regulatory standards to account for the operational characteristics of storage, which are different from some of the other existing technologies that those regulatory standards were designed for. And one of the issues that you brought up, Dan, was peak. This came up just recently. We did some work in Massachusetts to support the inclusion of behind-the-meter storage in the state's energy efficiency program, which was just approved by the state DPU in January. And one of the issues there was that the state had been defining peak as anything between 9 a.m. and 11 p.m. on weekdays,
Yes.
and year-round. And so if you do that and you say basically daytime is peak and nighttime is off-peak, then the value of reducing load during any given peak hour, because you're averaging across such a huge number of hours, is quite low. Whereas if you define peak as the top 10% of the hours out of the year, either in terms of price or in terms of demand, then the value of offsetting load during that smaller number of hours is much, much higher. And that's what you have to look at, that kind of regulatory regime, and say, is storage able to do the work? Yes. Okay. Then is it able to get paid or compensated appropriately for the work? Well, maybe not unless we make some regulatory changes here to make it sensible for storage to participate. So thank you for bringing that up. It leads actually to another question from our listeners, which is somebody wants to know what value is there to increasing duration of storage beyond 4 hours? I'll just throw that open to anybody who wants to jump in.
So I could take a crack at that. This is Dan Borneo at Sandia. What what we're reading and what we're hearing, especially from the utilities, is the longer duration, 4 hours and 4+ hours, and basically that gets into when you really want to say have energy storage as a generation resource, correct? So if you just have PV, you're obviously going to be offline between when it's dark. So figure 12 hours a day. And if you really wanted to have a dispatchable resource and you combine PV and batteries, then your batteries are going to have to last, the 12 hours. So there are various ways of doing that, right? I mean, if you have a small load, you could have a big battery and it's going to a big power capacity battery, but it'll last a long time in energy because your load is small. We kind of advocate a combination of batteries, renewables, and traditional generation. But as we get away from the traditional generation, a longer storage battery is going to be required. And Todd, back to the question, the original question of what other technologies are out there. We are working in the labs and with industry on technologies such as the flow batteries, which are 4-hour batteries, or they could be longer. They have a feature that you could basically isolate or separate the power component from the energy component. So we are working on those batteries and trying to get them into the market. So there are some options for longer storage battery. And then there are other batteries that the labs are working on that are still kind of in the lab, just kind of coming out of the lab, where we're trying to get down. I think Dan mentioned $150 per kilowatt hour price point, and we're trying to get that down to below $100 per kilowatt hour with some of the newer technologies that are in the lab right now.
Trouble is, basically, customers are only willing to pay for charging or discharging. Electrons sitting inside the batteries, or potential rather, isn't really something that gets paid for. And so if you have a battery that retains charge for a long time and just sits there, and you use it after 10 hours, it doesn't get paid for that large capacity that's available. It only gets paid when you actually use the energy. So it's much more cost effective to do a shorter term battery, but charge and discharge more frequently. In general, if you do the valuation, 4 hours to perhaps 6 hours turns to be optimal. Of course, particularly for things like military applications and disaster preparedness, it would be nice to have much more reserved.
Yeah, Dr. Gyuk, I'll follow up on one point you made there. Batteries generally only get paid when they're doing something. That's where we started with frequency regulation, where batteries are always taking energy off, putting it back on. That's all energy storage does, is it moves energy from one time to another. With frequency regulation, it's minute to minute. With peaking applications, it's hour to hour, potentially longer duration, seasonal, moving it from winter to summer or back again. But one point I would make is a really interesting development in Hawaii about this being paid not to do anything in question. Traditional solar PPAs are generally, you have some capacity value there, but it's dollars per megawatt hour. And that's generally what energy storage was as well, which means that if a utility, for whatever reason, if it didn't want to dispatch the energy storage system, that developer, that operator or owner would be losing money because the electrons are sitting in the battery system, not doing anything. The latest HECO PPA structure is different. They're now awarding their compensation through a monthly lump sum figure, which is based on the technical potential of the solar plus energy storage system. So if the system is offline and unable to respond, you still get punished. The lump sum payment goes down, but it doesn't mean that you actually have to inject into the grid anymore to get paid. They're paying for the potential, and they're doing that because of flexibility. If they come into a situation currently where they don't want the battery system discharged, they have curtailment clauses in the PPA contracts, which I'm sure the developers hate because it cuts off their dollars per megawatt hour amount. Because the developers hate it so much, they include curtailment ceilings into the PPA contracts, which means you can curtail us, but only X many hours per year. Usually that's confidential. Now, because it's a lump sum payment, the utility, if they wanted to, could have the battery sitting there. This is that flexibility question I was telling you about before. APS says, hey, 7 years from now, we might not want natural gas. Hawaii is saying, hey, we may not want to dispatch this battery all the time. So we're going to redesign this PPA structure, and guess what? Start incentivizing you, even if you're sitting around doing nothing. So this is a development in the past month and a half. So it's a really exciting time to be in energy storage, where we're starting to see value, potential, capacity, things that we don't talk about with energy storage before, really being recognized by the industry.
That's what it would take.
Agreed.
Okay, so we have time for maybe a couple, 2 or 3 more questions. We have a couple of questions regarding the the marriage of solar and storage, or perhaps I should say the relationship of solar and storage. I think one of our speakers, I think it was Dan, said that they are joined at the hip for residential, or seem to be at the moment anyway, for residential applications. But in terms of the larger landscape, we have a couple of questions about how much of the overall deployment of storage is associated with solar, and also for under FERC 841 in terms of storage being able to participate in ancillary markets and wholesale markets. Is there any added value to it being combined with solar as opposed to just standalone storage participating in those markets?
Yeah, I'd be happy to dive into that quickly. Starting with the FERC question, hybrids, in addition to DER aggregation, how hybrid systems are recognized is going to be the next big thing. There are benefits. There's a myriad of benefits to co-siting energy storage with renewables. ITC is the biggest one by far. But another benefit that doesn't get discussed too much is interconnection costs. There's another FERC order in the 840s, FERC order 845, which really doesn't get discussed enough, but may actually in the short term be a bigger driver of storage. 845 essentially says that energy storage can piggyback on an existing interconnection agreement. So if I have a 200 megawatt solar farm, I can install a 200 megawatt storage system as long as I never inject more than 200 megawatts from the combined both of them into the market. This decreases the time that you have to go through the development process, which reduces risk, especially with supply constraints. So short term, that's a really big deal. I would focus on that one, and then yeah, there are a myriad of other benefits as well. In terms of how much is going to be deployed, there's actually a lot of standalone storage for capacity applications that's going to be installed. A lot of it, strangely enough, in California, where you have a lot of solar incentives coming in. All of the Moss Landing projects, which were, I believe, a gigawatt hour of energy storage announced last year, are going to be standalone systems. Plenty of other ones as well. But as I said during my presentation, over the next 5 years, it's going to be 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 megawatts of storage that are going to be installed with solar. There's still going to be a lot more solar megawatts than there are storage megawatts.
Okay, great. Well, I think we have reached the end of our time, and I apologize that we weren't able to get to all the questions. We did have an extraordinary number of them, and we did the best we could. I don't want to extend it because it was already a fairly long webinar, but I do really appreciate all the questions and want to thank our presenters. It was excellent, and for those of you who want to review or may have arrived late and missed part of the webinar, it will be available on our website, both in its entirety and as a slide deck. And I'll let Samantha tell you more about that, as well as other upcoming events that she may want to announce.
Thanks, Todd. So like Todd said, you will get an email with a copy of the webinar recording. It's also going to be on our website at cisa.org/webinars. There's some other links and contact info on your screen. And we wanted to let you know about a webinar that we have coming up on March 26th. That is going to be Energy Storage 101, Part 1, Battery Storage Technology, Systems, and Cost Trends. So I will encourage you to register for this webinar. You can do that at cisa.org/webinars. We'll also send you a link to that webinar when we send you a link to the recording. So stay tuned for that. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next one. Bye.